Why'd you stop? Now, as they went on their way, he entered a certain village where a woman named Martha welcomed him into her home. She had a sister named Mary, who sat at the Lord's feet and listened to what he was saying. But Martha was distracted by her many tasks. So she came to him and asked, "Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to do all the work by myself? Tell her then to help me." But the Lord answered her, "Martha, Martha, you are worried and distracted by many things. There is need of only one thing. Mary has chosen the better part, which will not be taken away from her." The Gospel of the Lord. All right, I saw several hands going up. You identified with Martha, but see, in my world, her name isn't Martha. Her name is Kathy. Kathy is my sister-in-law, whom I dearly love. I realize it's not supposed to work that way, but I can't help it. She's remarkably like my wife. But when anything family-related happens in Columbus or the surrounding area, it happens at Kathy's house. That's just a given. Something up, it'll be at Kathy's, which is great. She has a lovely place, plenty of room, except for this tiny little detail that makes me a little nuts, and I'm not the only one. She obsesses over serving everyone, and she spends all of her time tied up in the kitchen when everybody else is having a good time, sharing, interacting, and somebody will say, "Where's Kathy?" Well, where do you think? Missing out on what we're doing here because she's hosting us. That's kind of what's going on here, ladies and gentlemen. This gospel has been used so many different ways to elevate women's position in leadership, to downplay women's abilities to lead. I mean, it's gone every way. Lots of bad ink has been spilled on this tiny little snippet of gospel that when you get right down to it, there isn't much there. There really isn't much there. So, where do these people get the idea, well, this means Jesus is saying you should do this and not that, and you should do this and not that, and, well, maybe. But I'm looking at the fact that Jesus has just told the lawyer that story about a Samaritan. That lawyer who wanted to nitpick and follow all the rules and do things just right by the rules. And Jesus says, guess what? That's not how it works. It's not by the rules, it's by... And the lawyer saying, okay, so when I love the Lord with all my heart, with all my mind, with all my soul, and the neighbor is myself, I have to do something. And now we have this. And Martha's doing something. She's doing the Emily Post thing. She's doing the Kathy obsession, worrying about making everything just right. And those who would say that Jesus is criticizing her for that would be wrong. It's good. This serving him is good. This hospitality is to be expected. He has just sent the 72 out saying, when you go into a house, accept the hospitality that is offered you, whatever that may be. And he's going to have a meal. Things are going to be fine. So the problem isn't that Martha is serving and Mary is listening. That is not a problem. The problem is when the obsession over getting the hospitality right wears on the person doing it and deprives that person of interaction with the recipient of that hospitality. Are you listening, Kathy? No. So Jesus says one thing is needed. Mary has elected the good portion. It will not be taken from her. And I love that little punny thing he does with the good portion, which biblically in the Old Testament refers to the meal. This is your serving of the meal. It's like he's got dueling suppers going on here. There's Martha's supper, and there's the one that Jesus is offering. And no matter how good Martha's supper is, the one falling from Jesus' lips is going to be more important in the long run. And Mary's there to catch it. It's not about what's going to go into his mouth, it's what's coming out and what those around him can have in hearing that and being blessed by it. So if we try to look at it as a competition between Martha and Mary, we missed the mark. As Kathy pointed out, they're both fine. They're both fine. As Fred Craddock once said, if we asked Jesus which example we're to follow, the Good Samaritan or the contemplative Mary, Jesus would probably say, yes. Deal with it, and both. Because it's in the focus. It's in why are you doing the activity. And appreciating where that activity fits. 10 points for anybody who can tell me why yesterday was an important date. And I don't mean Karen and Kay, because that, of course, was an important date. Yes, the 50th anniversary. Yes. 50th anniversary. 50 years seems like such a long time, or it did to me back then, 50 years ago. Anyway, some of the stories that we've been getting on the anniversary event, some of the background stories are kind of interesting. And one that was fairly well known, it was out there at the time and it kind of disappeared. When the lunar lander was just about to the moon on the descent from the control module, the computer went on the fritz, causing no small amount of panic. And when I say computer, I mean it makes your cell phone look like a supercomputer. It was pretty lame. But anyway, it went on the fritz, and Armstrong had to manually override and put the lander down. And it was interesting because they learned that where the computer was going to put it was in a big crater, which would not have been a good thing. So because it went on the fritz, Armstrong could kind of, by guess and by golly, land it in a better spot. But not without a lot of angst. Just a few details to be distracting. Once they've landed, there had been a scheduled rest time. This was planned because they knew that these two men were going to need some time to kind of chill, rest a little bit, get themselves together, maybe take a nap before they went out for the moonwalk. And Buzz Aldrin knew that that time was going to be happening, and he'd made a plan for it. He had gone to his pastor, and his pastor had given him consecrated wine and a wafer. And when they signed off the radio feed for the world to be listening in for this rest time, he said, "I'm going to take some time for everyone to give thanks in their own way." Radio silence, and Buzz Aldrin takes communion on the moon, remembering who is there with them, and that they are there for a reason, and that it was not possible without God. As he reads from John, I am the vine, you are the branches, nothing is possible without me. And he takes that moment, he takes that, not unlike when Jesus says to Mary, come here, come chill, come, breathe. That's what Jesus wants for Mary. So it's important that we take that time to listen to the word. It's important that we take time to serve. And in point of fact, one leads to the other. Another bit of history, a little farther back and not as uplifting, if you will. Story about a woman named Grace Thomas. Grace was born at the beginning of the 20th century, 20-something, I don't remember. And she was born in Alabama, but moved to Georgia, wound up in Atlanta, working as a clerk in the state capitol. And she got so wrapped up in all the politics and the law and all that in addition to her job and being a mother, she decided to go back to night school for a law degree because she had nothing else to do. I don't know how she did that, but... And in 1954, with this law degree that she'd been sitting on for a little while, she decided to do something a little different, and she announced to her family and friends that she was going to run for office. And she wasn't talking about county commissioner. She decided she was going to run for governorship. And in 1954, there were 9 Democratic candidates for the Democratic primary for the governorship. Now, in 1954, there was only one topic on the campaign trail, and that was Brown versus Board of Education. Some of us remember a little fallout from that. Her position was not terribly popular, and her campaign slogan was, "Say grace at the polls," and not many folk did, because she was the only candidate in favor of Brown versus Board of Education, because she saw that legally it was the right thing. She was a lawyer. She came in dead last. The family said, "Phew, dodged that bullet, we're done with that nonsense." Or not. 8 years later, with racial tensions even hotter, in 1962, she decides to run again. Her progressive platform earned her death threats, among other threats. One day, she was holding a rally in, I think the name of the little town was Louisville. And she decided to have her rally right beside the old slave market, which was still there as a landmark in town. What's wrong with that picture? But she's standing there, and she motions to the platform. She says, here, where people have been bought and sold like a product. She's saying, the old has passed away, the new has come. A new day has come when all Georgians, white and black, can join hands and work together. At that point, a very irate, red-faced man says, "Are you communist?" Now, the modern version of this is, "Are you a socialist?" Yep, we've been hearing it. It's all the same stuff. "You a communist?" She says, "Well, no. I'm a lawyer. I know the law." He says, "Where do you get these damned ideas?" She points to the church across the square She said, I learned them over there in Sunday school. See, Grace had spent time listening to the word of her Lord. And what she heard changed her life a lot, launched her into a very specific mission that was very difficult and not terribly successful. But it's always good to take the time to listen to the word of the Lord, as long as we recognize that that word can be dangerous. But it also needs to lead to action. And she trusted that. See, when Jesus sees Martha in her state of anxiety, being pulled away from him, he flips the roles. Although the word doesn't come up in this particular part of the gospel, xenos is the Greek word for guest or stranger. It's also the word for host. So when we hear about xenophobia in our society, what we're hearing is a fear of the stranger or guest and a fear of being a host. But Jesus says to Martha, let me host. Hear me. Come, sit, listen, hear my words, but be prepared for some more action. I want to end with a little poem that I ran across last week by Scott Barton that just kind of sums it up nicely. It's called Real Freedom. Oh, Martha, you're running around distracted and worried and tense. And Mary's no help. The Lord does not care. He simply wants grace to dispense. Yes, that is the thing we find so hard to hear. There's more to do than there are hours. We cannot keep up. We resent those who don't and wish that we had much more power. But what Jesus means when to Martha he speaks is if his disciple you'd be, you'll trust him 100% with your life. Receiving, that's when you are free. Amen.